Let's get serious, shall we? There's going to be a political showdown today expected between Kemi Badenoch and Sir Keir Starmer.
That's as the Conservatives force a vote on the changes to the inheritance tax on farms announced in the budget.
Well, the changes have already provoked fury within the farming community, with one beef farmer, Matt Cullen, issuing this message to the government.
They want to come around the table and talk to all the relevant people. We can sort it out very quickly. If they want to keep digging their heels in, I think farmers will take further action and it will cause food shortages. You know, we've had it tough. This is not just the tax. We've had it. Supermarkets and the buyers have hit us for quite a long time. You know, these are all things that are adding up. And this was the final nail in the coffin in the agricultural sector.
Meanwhile, new polling from Ipsos shows over half the public would support farmers if they decided to strike, in line with support for nurses and ambulance workers.
Well, joining us now is the former advisor to Nadhim Zahawi, James Price. Good morning. Always good to see you.
Good morning.
Conservatives forcing this vote today, but given the size of the majority that Labour has in Parliament, is it going to change anything? Or is this just about really the Conservatives saying, look, we're flying the flags, we're here for you farmers, and putting the pressure on perhaps some of those rural Labour constituencies?
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think this is called an opposition day debate in the kind of parliamentary jargon. It means that it's one of the rare times the Conservatives will be able to choose what gets debated. Normally, obviously, it's the government that gets to control that with the majority that it has. And so you've got to think, if you're in the opposition's sort of shoes, right, what's the most embarrassing thing we can throw at the government? What's the worst thing we think they're doing that we can try and highlight some of this? They obviously think it's this point about farmers. There's now almost 100, I think, Labour seats that are rural or semi-rural. And so they think there's been some good analysis, actually, from GB News that looks at some of the seats that are most at risk. The one that's really got me here is mid and South Pembrokeshire. There's a new Labour MP called Henry Tufnell, who's been described, I think, as the poshest Labour MP. And in the days before this was announced, actually the Daily Mail revealed his family moved hundreds of acres into tax-efficient trusts. So it's one of those classic one rule for me and another rule for thee. So hopefully the Conservatives can make some hay with this, unintended.
Yes, it feels almost like sort of insider trading when people do that. They know what's going to happen, they know the rules, and they shift things around to make it beneficial. Now, with this debate, does that now expose some of the Labour MPs with their views as to where they stand with this whole farmer debacle?
That's right. So it's that kind of awkward thing of, do they go along with the government line, or do they go and vote and say, yes, I agree with this motion that says that farmers are already brilliant? So a lot of it will come down to how the wording kind of plays out, but this will really kind of, in the modern way that campaigning works, you'll sort of clip up different speeches and they'll be targeted on Facebook and things like that. But it's really about trying to get the Labour MPs to see, look, are you really going to go and do this? I think the problem is that the numbers for Labour clearly don't stack up. The Treasury have made a mistake here. The Department for the Environment have made a mistake here. Big Labour partisans like Dan Needle, who pretends to go and be a neutral guy, is a Labour activist. That tax guy. Yeah. He actually came out and said, yeah, I've got the numbers wrong as well, which is quite shocking. So in any just world, they would do a big reversal on this. They're not going to do it. And why is that? I think it's because they genuinely want to punish rural communities the way they did with the sort of fox hunting vote in 20-odd years ago, because Labour doesn't care about our rural communities.
I mean, they would deny it, wouldn't they? They would say that actually already they're getting more generous benefits when it comes to inheritance tax than ordinary people. But as you say, the tide seems to have changed in terms of the numbers. Even the Institute for Fiscal Studies coming out going, there is some tinkering that could be done here that would mean that these hard-working farmers that are actually very, very cash poor, even though they're asset-rich, won't be penalised. Will Labour listen? And is it a bad thing for a government to U-turn? It always comes down to this issue. They're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't, because we're all saying, for goodness sake, back down on this. And then when they do, we go, oh, flip-flopping.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually, you know, there have to be some principles here. And if you're going after rural communities, and it could harm food security going into Christmas...
Right.
And protests next week.
Well, this is utter madness, isn't it? Did they do an impact assessment on this again? Because there seem to be lots of policies emerging where it turns out, they haven't done an impact assessment.
Yeah, well, no, if you do the impact assessment and it doesn't give you the kind of political answer you want, then you're in trouble. So it's better not to do it in some ways.
Is that why they avoid it?
Well, very often. And I think what happens is that the Treasury will model these sorts of things, and they'll say, OK, well, if you put up taxes by this much, that means we can raise this much money that will then go and spend somewhere else. What they don't do is look at the second-order consequences, which is to say, OK, well, if we put taxes up by this much, people will go and change their behaviour. If all of these family farms die and people then decide to just sell off the land for something else, what happens down the line? If you put up taxes on businesses in other areas, will they stop investing? Will they move that investment abroad? Will they not hire as many people? And then you've got to spend more money in other areas on benefits and things like that. And the government is very, very bad at trying even to work that out. Because, of course, the flip side is if you cut people's taxes, you could then also model and say, well, we're not going to make that much money in, but that may have a good impact on the rest of the economy. And people start investing their own money. They start hiring more people. And so that very rarely gets looked at.
Can we talk about the railways? Busy first week for Heidi Alexander, the brand new Transport Secretary. And she's coming out with a sort of timetable for the first, I don't know if you want to call it franchise, that's going to be renationalised. What do you make of this? This is the first sort of renationalisation since the Thatcher era. What do you think?
Yeah, well, you mentioned setting out a timetable. If it's going to be renationalised, this timetable will be delayed as all the trains are going to be. I think this is a massive mistake. I think the fact is that the railway lines are mostly nationalised already. We never really did a full privatisation. We still had a kind of system where most of the rail lines are all actually controlled by the state. It's only what they call the TOCs, the train operating companies, that have been made by private investment, and that's the stuff that they're talking about nationalising. The problem is that, I mean, my numbers are a bit out of date on this, but between 2010 and 2017, those private companies that ran those lines invested almost £500 million or something like that into the rolling stock, into these other areas. They also paid a huge amount of tax as well. So if you want that kind of investment, and that was investment that was still catching up from the years of nationalisations where we didn't have enough money to invest in the railway line, we're going to have to start having taxpayers pay for that instead.
The question will be, will they actually try to keep fares down, therefore not get enough revenue from the profits to reinvest into the rolling stock, and do we therefore just see a decline of the system, much like people would say with TfL, Transport for London, where Khan, keeps the prices down, but there's no investment in those tubes. But it seems to be a theme this morning, because I was reading about British Steel, talk about that being returned to state control. That would reverse Thatcher's 1988 privatisation of the industry.
But that's a good
to try
thing.
and save
But that's
jobs.
a good thing. I mean, they've already shut down a load of steel works, and all they'll end up doing is importing steel from China, and then you're at the mercy of other nations. So surely this is a good thing. Is this not a good thing for them to renationalise steel?
Well, I tend to think that nationalisation is never really a very good option in almost every case. What does the government know about running businesses? What does it know about running train lines,
But at least
for
you
example?
maintain controls of the means of
So I
production.
think there's an exception when it comes to areas of defence. And actually the UK is very liberal, the small L, in terms of not designating very many industries as critical strategic assets. Only a very small number of areas around things like warships and things like that. If you were to designate steel as that, it would mean the taxpayer was on the hook for a lot more. But you would do it. Something like the French, by the way, they classify all kinds of things as strategic assets to help them with extra support, things like cheese making and all that kind of stuff as well. Adam Smith would say that defence is much more important than opulence. And I think that as the world gets much, much more dangerous, we should definitely be doing everything we can to make sure that we've got sort of war-fighting capabilities. But that would mean then let's not spend our money on renationalising a rail network.
Yeah, and
only 9% of people actually commute using trains.
And what cost will it be to nationalise the steel sector? It was nationalised in 2020 for 10 months. It was £600 million of taxpayers' money.
I think we need it, and I would like them to talk about nationalising water. They're not talking about
Absolutely
it. That's
not.
the one thing that I think, water is life. So you've got foreign owners for all the different water companies. I think it's a nightmare.
People at home get basically unlimited, very clean water for pennies. That is something through most of human history was completely unattainable, and the current system allows us to do that.
Yes,
we definitely shouldn't invest in
Well, we'll leave that debate.
Yeah.
All right. Always good to talk to you. Thanks very much, James Price, former advisor to Nadeem Zahawi.